Hey folks, and welcome to another video from aplaintruth.info. Today I'm starting a new series. It's called Odd Watching Geoengineering, and odd means omissions, distortions, and deceptions, because so much is being omitted from the truth movement in geoengineering and chemtrails. We need to start talking about this. And I want to give a huge shout out to Weather Wars 101. It was just a few months ago I started looking into their site and just found so much information. I've been following geoengineering since 2005, and this was all new information for me, so thank you very much. So we're going to cover wet surface air coolers today, NEXRAD, Doppler, along with HAARP, ocean-based water systems, the Silver Lining Project by Bill Gates that makes water vapors to create weather offshore, critical to create the climate because we've completely collapsed the climate, and why they must geoengineer the world, or else. And then also the odd characters in watching geoengineering, because as I said, this weather modification history is not having a full story told, and we're just on the cusp of the geoengineering community. David Keith and all the shills that work for the government that's been doing the geoengineering now for decades is about to make it all perfectly legal. So all this legal anti-geoengineering action is going to go by the wayside, and we'll cover that as well. But I just wanted to bring your attention to how much the programming is being done. I mean, here's a picture of the Marriott Hotel, and they've got chemtrail paintings in the background. This is the mind control, folks. We're in desperate mode here. The weather has collapsed. They're increasing the geoengineering ever more intensely. And I'll put in the notes, but study this model. This is what they're doing. This is how they have to do it in order to create weather, because we've collapsed the weather systems. And this is what Weather Wars 101 has been talking about for so long. And this is part of the Silver Lining Project, having to make ocean water vaporization to combine with the cloud condensation nuclei and the barium salts. None of the geoengineering, or few of the geoengineering and chemtrails talk about barium salts at all and why it is necessary in the sky and the chemtrails. But today I want to focus on the wet surface air coolers. These are ground-based water vapor machines creating the water vapor through these machines that are being used to shoot up into the air to combine with the barium being sprayed with the chemtrails and the cloud condensation nuclei to make weather. These are all over the world. Wall Street must go up. It's hitting new record highs, but we're destroying our nest at all costs. And I don't know any other creature that destroys the own nest it lives in but humans. But unfortunately, we're going to have to learn that this is the revenge of Gaia. Nature bats last. She's going to sweat us out of here. And the manipulation of the weather by the geoengineers is only making things worse, much worse, and it's getting accelerated. And if all they have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So just to drive home a point, you'll find very, very few geoengineering or chemtrail sites that talk about weather modification incorporated. You can see program services, meteorological services, atmospheric assessments, cloud seeding, weather radar systems. That's the Doppler NEXRAD we'll get into at another time. Here's the aircraft everywhere. But they have atmospheric assessments in the clouds, the transformation of invisible atmospheric water vapor to visible droplets governed by nucleation, the character of local aerosols and cloud condensation nuclei. Okay, so you're not hearing that being talked about on all these sites, and folks. And here's another bunch of companies that are sponsored by our state governments for wet surface air coolers, weather modification, Wisconsin. These are all sites that provide wet surface air cooling and other services for geoengineering that are not being covered by nearly all chemtrail and geoengineering sites, and all these people like Freeland and Kirby and these others that are putting out geoengineering books. Okay.
Despite the cost, however, NASA does need to test these engines once in a while. So they built this place in the wetlands of Mississippi. This gave them an imaginary boundary line, and anyone living on the inside of it was offered a simple choice. Stay, and you'll never hear another television program as long as you live. Or take the NASA shilling and get out. No one stayed, and NASA ended up with exactly what it wanted. 125,000 acres of nothing. They even had to move 5 cemeteries. because the noise they were planning on making would wake the dead. Don't worry if you can't hear what I'm saying. I couldn't even hear myself. This is the loudest sound you could possibly conceive. And, as it turns out, the cleanest. Now, the most amazing thing is that that cloud up there, which was generated by the engine, is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain. I told you, it's raining. That's unbelievable. Oh. NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather.
So that was an example of NASA's weather modifying device. They sell it as a engine testing device, but as you can clearly see, it's made to modify weather. It's known as a wet surface air cooler. These devices are all around the world and are used to manipulate and control the weather from the ground. Most of us are aware of geoengineering from the skies. We look up, we see that the skies are being painted much more. The geoengineering chemtrails include aluminum, barium, strontium, formaldehyde. They also will spray chemtrail flu to make people sick to help Big Pharma. But these wet surface air coolers, ground-based weather manipulators, it's very little discussed. Weather Wars 101, which I'll include in the show notes, is the only site I know of that is actually bringing to light these massive devices that are all over the world that are manipulating the weather at will. And as you can see from this video right here, from a ground-based to an aerial view, you can see clearly that weather is being created. Cloud formations are being created, and when they add the different devices, they can steer and move the weather. You get a little higher picture here, and you can see this is just creating these huge plumes from ground-based devices, yet geoengineering and chemtrail alternative media, except for Weather Wars, are lax in covering this. The devices they use to steer the weather, you've maybe seen them, they look like golf balls, are called NEXRAD, Doppler radar you see on TV, you hear on the news services. Those are the devices they use radio frequencies to steer and control the weather, but the water evaporation towers that are going up into the air are a huge part of the entire geoengineering ecosystem control, and it needs to be brought to light. Another is the Bill Gates Silver Lining Project, where they actually have devices that use seawater to spread water vapors up into the air as well.
actually have a storm, and we've had some giant storms in the last few years. They're all man-made, and at the center of them you will find a NEXRAD tower. So what is NEXRAD? It's a form of radar. It's the new form of radar. It's Doppler-based. And the two things that weather war brings us in terms of new knowledge are the fact that these NEXRAD towers are in the very eye of these man-made storms. So that's clue number one. And clue number two, which actually goes backward in this unfolding that I'm giving you, is that we have an abundance of power plants all over the world today, not just all over the country. And I had seen these for years. I never knew what they were. I'd be driving along the freeway and I'd see these tall smokestacks, and I would think to myself, factories. Yeah, those are factories. And they'd be pumping out, belching out huge amounts of what looked like pollution. Huge amounts of gray smoke, white smoke. And I'd think to myself, wow, that is a busy factory. What does it make? And I would think, why aren't people screaming about this ugly stuff that's pouring out of these chimneys? And I found out later from Weather War that those are not factories. They're power plants. And what they are releasing into the atmosphere is millions and millions and millions of gallons of steam. So this is a technology called WSAC, Wet Surface Air Cooler. And the operation is known as direct steam condensing for power generation using closed-loop evaporative WSAC technology. So these power plants are using water to create, again, on the surface electricity, but they're releasing huge, huge quantities of steam into the atmosphere.
Yep.
And this is the source of the water vapor for chemtrails. Now, I was staggered when I learned this. And when you see these things working at night, it's not that there's a night shift going on in factories because it's such a busy industry for whatever they're making. It's because this is the time when people are least likely to notice. And there are areas, if you look at Google Maps and you look for power plants in various cities, you'll see how they're all clustered together. In the Midwest, where they have tons of these storms and chemtrails, you will see sometimes huge power plants within a few blocks of one another. There'll be 3 or 4 of them with the tall chimneys. And Weather War wrote me an email in which he said, they tell us to turn off the water while toothbrushing, but meanwhile a water system traverses this country that produces enough vapor to drive a global artificial weather system.
Yep.
Just another spectacular example of the hoodwinking of the human species.
Atmospheric cooling towers. Atmospheric cooling towers use no mechanical devices to move air through the tower. A cooling tower is a heat transfer device used in industry to cool water that is used in a cooling system.
Cooling towers are shell structures built of concrete in which hot water is allowed to cool. Thereby, thermal energy is released to the environment. The most well-known form is the natural draft wet cooling tower, as shown in this animation. Natural draft wet cooling towers can be up to 200 meters tall and are made up of a cold water basin, an air inlet near the bottom of the tower evaporates. This can be seen as plumes of steam. Natural draft wet cooling towers function according to the simple principle of the stack effect, also known as natural circulation. Since warm air is less dense than cold air, warm air rises due to buoyancy and escapes out of the upper opening of the tower. This leads to a self-preservation of the stack effect.
Water is wet. 62,500 power plants from 2 to 240 of these wet seal air cooler blower facilities evaporating from anywhere from 18,000 gallons a minute to 700,000 gallons a minute, adding trillions of gallons of water vapor to the atmosphere and God knows how much heat, and has for the last 50 years. Very important to understand, 18,000 gallons or 700,000 gallons a minute, adding trillions of gallons of water vapor.
At the heat addition side, the burning coal produces many pollutants.
The wide range of fluid streams cooled by the WSACs in the wastewater industry include various liquids prior to biological treatment. WSAC is a preferred technology for wastewater cooling due to the ability to maintain the critical outlet temperature required for biological treatment tanks, commonly referred to as bug ponds.
Water surface air coolers are all over the world and come in many sizes and many shapes. You've seen them in the nuclear power plants, and you've seen them in some of the industrial complexes, and they're all being used to manipulate the weather around the world, since we do not have any more normal weather, nor have we had normal atmospheric nature's weather for over a couple decades at least, which I'll get into in a little bit. So as you can see from these images, not only are they using tons and tons of water to create water vapor while telling us we're in a water drought, but they're also using effluents from our waste to spread up into the air, along with all the other coal and crap that goes through these machines that are all, as I said, are all around the world. So as you can see, these water surface air coolers are being used to manipulate the weather. We can see it in so many different places, in so many different styles, and so many different shapes. And what I find absolutely astounding is the geoengineering and chemtrail community that has been active for over 10 years has not even addressed this issue, except for Weather Wars 101 and Sophia Smallstorm. So this is a whole new avenue for geoengineering and for the chemtrail activists to get involved with and start discussing how wet surface air coolers, WSAC, are a huge part in the entire weather manipulation closed loop system, using chemtrails, barium salt to activate the clouds so the water vapors can interact, and then the NEXRAD, Doppler, HAARP facilities, radio frequencies to steer the weather. And here you can see it's like the Home Depot of water surface air coolers. That's how prevalent these all are.
The heated up water from the condenser outlet is sprayed in the cooling tower, which induces a natural air draft, and the sprayed water loses heat. This is how a colder liquid is always provided at the condenser inlet.
So its critical part of the operation is that water, when it's released from these cooling towers, is some 10 to 15 to even 20 degrees cooler than it is at ambient temperature on ground level. This is an example using a simple ice inside a water chest and a blower to show how water can be cooled using air over a cooler surface. This helps cool the air to create rainwater above in the skies.
The amazing thing is that that cloud up there, which was generated by the engine, is just a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen. It's water vapor. And in about an hour's time, someone in Mississippi is going to get wet washing. It will actually rain. It's raining! That's unbelievable! Oh, NASA's playing God. It's making its own weather.
All right, so this is the effect of cooling towers on the atmosphere. This is from Weather Wars 101. He's citing a 1971 Zion nuclear power plant study on the effects of cooling towers on the atmosphere and weather. There are, as he states here, 62,500 of these power plants worldwide. Also, the wet surface air cooling farms that could only have one conceivable purpose, known as WSAC. All right, if we scroll down, this is the study, the effect of cooling tower effluents on atmospheric conditions in northeastern Illinois. It was done in 1971. So the study shows that it was already known back in 71 that massive amounts of water vapor from even one nuclear power plant with 4 cooling towers would have significant effects on the atmospheric conditions and weather. So here's a different independent study confirming that wet surface air cooling systems began around 1971. It says here, the waste heat removed by the cooling system during the steam condensation step must ultimately be transferred to the surrounding environment. The high heat unit capacity water has been the traditional transfer medium of choice because its relative availability, inexpensive, and reusable. Wet cooling systems use water to absorb heat via indirect contact with steam in a condenser. The heated water is either discharged to a large surface water body such as a river or lake, or passed through a cooling tower and recycled back. In either case, heat absorbed in the condenser is released to the environment through a combination of evaporation and sensible heating of their surroundings. Prior to 1990, virtually all steam electric power plants used wet cooling systems. And then it goes on to say, down here a little further, that however, in the early 1970s, new steam electric generation began using recirculated cooling. And here's a list of extensive patents on geoengineering and aerosol spray. And this seems to validate and further confirm that the wet surface air coolers were rolled out in 1971. I mean, look at all these patents that were taken out. Methods of treating atmospheric conditions by intermittent displacements of materials, weather modification methods. So it does seem to indicate that wet surface air coolers are a major component developed starting in 1971 after the Mount Zion study. It is impossible to find a power plant of any fuel type that has no wet surface air coolers whatsoever. Fog potential, this is from the Zion study, fog potential was calculated for mechanical natural draft towers and pure natural draft towers of 350 and 500 feet. Certainly, large quantities of heat released to the atmosphere will result in an increase in convection, turbulence, and cumulus clouds. So, Weather Wars goes on to state, so what happened to all these concerns from 1970? They disappeared from the scientific community and from society as a whole, while simultaneously being developed as the foundation of the global engineering process. He says, we have 50 years of evidence of this reality. The very serious concerns raised by the Zion power plant study were enough to prevent their use on environmental reasons for that one plant. But subsequently, 7,000 power plants in the United States and 62,500 power plants worldwide. The potential impact of that one power plant that was deemed too great a risk to the environment now exists 62,500 times over. A Carson 1970 study states that extra heat and water vapor from cooling towers may create cumulus clouds, and that possibility of tower plumes acting as trigger to produce extra cumulus congestus clouds and precipitation miles downwind of the release must be considered. There are frequent occasions when tower plumes can be seen to evaporate and then recondense to some extent at higher altitudes further downwind. Under stable conditions with higher humidities, the plumes will persist after leveling off and appear downwind as stratus cloud cover and merge and reinforce existing cloud cover. So you see how they're altering the clouds here. So here's how it works. In order to create a rainstorm then, for instance, all we need to do is start the cloud system with a water vapor, released from a power plant A, wait until that initial cloud of water vapor reaches station B, then continuing the feeding clouding system with water vapor releases from station B. Wait until that more developed cloud system reaches station C, then continue feeding the cloud system with water vapor releases, and so on until the system reaches saturation and drops the accumulated water vapor as rain. From a climatological observations and cloud physics research, it is known that cumulus clouds and rain showers of thunderstorms can be triggered by relatively small inputs of energy. This is critical to understand. And a Shangon 1968 about has shown that areas downwind of Chicago had experienced 20 to 40% increases in precipitation due to urban industrial effects. Measurements of cooling tower plume profiles indicate that humidity increases can be detected for many miles downwind. It is quite evident that any severe weather event resulting from cooling tower effluence could be attained only through a triggering or stimulation effect. That is, the additional heat and or moisture fed into the developing storm cloud could conceivably produce an imbalance that could result in its intensification into a severe weather state. Okay?
Let's look at the science of rain and how raindrops form. First, we'll need the sun. When the sun shines on water on the Earth's surface, the heat of the sun warms the water, turning it into an invisible gas called water vapor. This process, the changing of water into a gas, is called evaporation. Because gases are lighter than liquids, water vapor rises up into the sky. And the further you move up and away from the Earth's surface, the colder the temperature gets. So in the sky, the water vapor cools and changes back into tiny water droplets. This change is called condensation and is the opposite of evaporation. Clouds are made up of tiny water droplets, so when condensation occurs in the sky, clouds form and grow. Let's take a closer look. When water droplets bump into one another, they stick together and grow in size. They continue to grow until they are too heavy and fall as rain. They even grow as they bump into one another on their journey from the cloud to the ground. And every single raindrop that reaches the ground is made up of 1 million of the original tiny water droplets. Raindrops fall on the ground surface where the sun can shine on them, and the whole process happens again. This is called the water cycle and keeps water moving from the ground to the sky, providing the water needed for plants, animals and people to survive.
So to be very clear, the hydrological cycle of ocean water makes the rain. Rain comes from the ocean's activities, or used to come from the ocean activities. Air currents enter water vapors into the atmosphere, and then the water vapors condense into small particles that are known as cloud condensation nuclei, or CCN. This particulate matter are less than a micron in diameter. They're extremely small. The condensation takes place just like water vapors condense on a saucepan's lid when water is boiled in it. In that same way, water vapors condense when they collide with the cloud condensation nuclei. Now, warm air can hold more water than cool air. But if the air, warm or cool, is holding half as much moisture as it can hold when saturated, the relative humidity is 50%. This is the temperature below which the air can no longer hold the moisture in vapor form, and liquid water or dew will form and rain is created.
The hot water in the kettle gives off water vapor to the air by rapid evaporation, just as rivers, lakes, and ponds give off water vapor to the air by slow evaporation. As the hot water-filled air hits the colder air near the ice tray, the water vapor turns into clouds of tiny water droplets floating in the air, condensation. When the air is quite cold and cannot hold any more water droplets, they collect together to form larger drops, as on the ice tray. And being too heavy to float in the air, they fall back to the earth as rain.
Dane Wigington at Geoengineering Watch and Weather Wars have got into a pissing match in a big way about these water cooling towers, and this is what Dane Wigington at Geoengineering Watch has to say about these cooling towers. Sophia, this is Sophia Smallstorm, on a Red Ice Radio interview about the cooling towers, Dane sent her a note and said, "I had your recent interview with Red Ice sent to me. Just wanted to give you an FYI. Well, Dane also goes on to say that he worked on cooling towers 30 years ago down in Daggett Valley. Apparently, according to his brother, he was a subcontractor for Bechtel working on electrical solar panels and would not have had any information, or if he did, it would have been secondhand from the architects and the engineers. But he was not an engineer. He was not a designer. Yet he goes on to claim that he was an expert on these cooling towers and can assure us that if we do the math, that this cannot be possibly true, though massive, massive amount of evidence is showing us otherwise. So just to button this up, this is just Google searching nuclear power plant water vaporization, water modification, and vapor generator for weather modification. This document is easily online on Google. Anyone can search it. Anyone can find out about wet surface air cooling towers being used all over the world. So why Mr. Wigington cannot find for himself, who's been studying intimately, has intimate knowledge of water cooling towers as patent, or many of the others, is beyond my ability to comprehend at this point. I worked on cooling towers for Bechtel in California. They can only put out enough steam to form a small cloud just over the facility. Do the math on 2 inches of rain over even a small geographical area. It's a massive amount of water. I know what I'm speaking about on this issue. I have worked on cooling towers, he says. Well, that's all I got for now. This has been quite a journey learning about this. I thought I understood geoengineering, but I found that you've got to check your sources, and you can't just trust a single source for anything. Do your homework. Research for yourself. I'll put show notes in here. But please look into wet surface air coolers. Look into NEXRAD. Look into barium salts. You'll see. And hopefully this video has helped put together for those with a little more advanced knowledge on geoengineering. They add in this full system, complete system managed from the clouds using the salts and the aluminums to interact with the cloud vapors from the massive machines that are everywhere and portable and highly easily produced. Look at how much massive weather they have to manipulate. They do it for decades now, folks. We're just waking up to that. How scary, how exciting, how fun, how horrifying for our children. We have to wake up now. I'm not sure we can change any of this, but waking up is the first part of any journey. And if you want to go in the comment sections, I'll leave them open, be civil, but please put this together. You're not going to get it from these alternative websites. Think for yourself. And here's some NASA strategy, NASA being their own entity of a corporation. They have war strategies. This is from a gentleman named Bushnell, Dennis Bushnell, in 2005, I believe, and it's his slideshow presentation talking about how they look at the future. And did you know NASA was a military operation, part of the Department of Defense? They had all the bigwigs at this presentation with the chief grand poobah of NASA for never a straight answer that we are funding with our tax dollars right and left. And what they talk about is aerosol spray applications in the micron dust dyes. Dust mechanically bores into lung tissues and it executes. They talk about existing biocalamity Venezuelan equine encephalitis. They talk about it being just totally legal so we can get away with anything. This is NASA, folks. Let's change the culture by changing our minds and educating ourselves and getting grounded that we are being polluted from so many different directions, but they have to alter the weather, because if it collapses, it's over for all of us. So we need to probably let it collapse in itself, but given the way they are going about things, they'll do it for us, and all we can do is say our prayers to all and take care of our children and the animals and the trees that are suffering and dying right now, and speak out, share this video. I know it's long, break it into parts, I'll break it into chapters, and just speak your truth where you can, when you can. I have some books for sale. If you need a deal, let me know. But please, this is the most important topic of all our lifetimes. The only one you can truly trust in this is yourself and others on the cyber world. But in your community, if you can get a few, more and more people are waking up, especially the kids. I'm finding the 20 and 30 somethings are much more receptive to these conversations now. So let's educate them with the new knowledge. Keep moving forward, onward. Keep our chin up. This is the greatest fight of our lifetimes. And thank you for all the support you've given over time. And please speak out and let your voice be heard. Take care, and we'll catch you on the next video, Doc. Hi. This book, Geoengineering, aka Chemtrails, and Humanity's Sixth Great Extinction Event, is one of the most important books you will ever read. For over 40 years, governments, military, and private corporations have been spraying our skies with heavy metal toxins and nanoparticulate matter without public disclosure or input. You may recognize the name chemtrails to describe the aerosol spraying applications airplanes are using as dispersants over us all. Other terms you may know are climate weather modification and geoengineering. This book is meant to provide the reader with an up-to-date overall review of all geoengineering, weather, and bioengineering applications being used above our heads in nearly every country of the world. You will learn in this book what is going on with the extreme heating and melting of the Arctic tundra, resulting in the mass release of formerly trapped methane gases over 1 million years, which is now causing humanity's sixth great extinction event. This book can be purchased through links in the show notes below. It is offered in both color and black and white copies. Geoengineering is simply the most important subject of our lifetimes. Please, please, help sound the alarm and share with others, and activate in your communities to stop the madness. Buy this book, learn about geoengineering, and spread the word. Portion of these book proceeds will go towards geoengineering education and activism. Thank you. History is not having a full story told, and we're just on the cusp of the geoengineering community. David Keith and all the shills that work for the government that's been doing the geoengineering now for decades is about to make it all perfectly legal. So all this legal anti-geoengineering action is going to go by the wayside, and we'll cover that as well. But I just wanted to bring your attention to how much the programming is being done. I mean, here's a picture of the Marriott Hotel, and they've got chemtrail paintings in the background. This is the mind control, folks. We're in desperate mode here. The weather has collapsed. They're increasing the geoengineering ever more intensely. And I'll put in the notes, but study this model. This is what they're doing. This is how they have to do it in order to create weather, because we've collapsed the weather systems. And this is what Weather Wars 101 has been talking about for so long. And this is part of the Silver Lining Project, having to make ocean water vaporization to combine with the cloud condensation nuclei and the barium. Hey folks, and welcome to another video from aplaintruth.info. Today I'm starting a new series. It's called Odd Watching Geoengineering, and odd means omissions, distortions, and deceptions, because so much is being omitted from the truth movement in geoengineering and chemtrails. We need to start talking about this. And I want to give a huge shout out to Weather Wars 101. It was just a few months ago I started looking into their site and just found so much information. I've been following geoengineering since 2005, and this was all new information for me, so thank you very much. So we're going to cover wet surface air coolers today, NEXRAD, Doppler, along with HAARP, ocean-based water systems, the Silver Lining Project by Bill Gates that makes water vapors to create weather offshore, critical to create the climate because we've completely collapsed the climate, and why they must geoengineer the world, or else. And then also the odd characters in watching geoengineering, because as I said, this weather modification not being covered by nearly all chemtrail and geoengineering sites, and all these people like Freeland and Kirby and these others that are putting out geoengineering books, okay?
Despite the cost, however, NASA does need to test these engines once in a while. So they built this place in the wetlands of Mississippi. This gave them an imaginary boundary line, and anyone living on the inside of it was offered a simple choice. Stay, and you'll never hear another television program as long as you live. Or take the NASA shilling and get out. No one stayed, and NASA ended up with exactly what it wanted. 125,000 acres of nothing.
If all they have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So just to drive home a point, you'll find very, very few geoengineering or chemtrail sites that talk about weather modification incorporated. You can see program services, meteorological services, atmospheric assessments, cloud seeding, weather radar systems. That's the Doppler NEXRAD we'll get into at another time. Here's the aircraft everywhere. But they have atmospheric assessments in the clouds, the transformation of invisible atmospheric water vapor to visible droplets governed by nucleation, the character of local aerosols and cloud condensation nuclei. Okay, so you're not hearing that being talked about on all these sites, and folks. And here's another bunch of companies that are sponsored by our state governments for wet surface air coolers, weather modification, Wisconsin. These are all sites that provide wet surface air cooling and other services for geoengineering that are not salts. None of the geoengineering, or few of the geoengineering and chemtrails talk about barium salts at all and why it is necessary in the sky and the chemtrails. But today I want to focus on the wet surface air coolers. These are ground-based water vapor machines creating the water vapor through these machines that are being used to shoot up into the air to combine with the barium being sprayed with the chemtrails and the cloud condensation nuclei to make weather. These are all over the world. Wall Street must go up. It's hitting new record highs, but we're destroying our nest at all costs. And I don't know any other creature that destroys the own nest it lives in but humans. But unfortunately, we're going to have to learn that this is the revenge of Gaia. Nature bats last. She's going to sweat us out of here. And the manipulation of the weather by the geoengineers is only making things worse, much worse, and it's getting accelerated. And all they have